But
Happy days.
you've been on the podcast twice now. Most people should be familiar, but give us a little background about yourself, Andrew, just quickly, just for people who are maybe tuning in to you for the first time.
Yeah, so I got my first degree at Dundee University of Sports Biomedicine, which isn't a degree anymore because it wasn't really what they advertised it as. Then I got my second at Aberdeen University, did strength and conditioning. Then I went down to Oxford Brookes and I did my master's in applied sports exercise nutrition. We went back up to Dundee to do my PhD, which looked at high dose vitamin D in combat athletes to see if we could improve exercise performance in these athletes. And now I am a lecturer at Aberdeen University. I mainly teach strength and conditioning, so I'm the program tutor for that degree, as well as helping teach on physiology, kind of nutrition, sports therapy. I teach on a whole bunch of different more kind of
So everything.
yeah. Yeah, I don't really touch physical activity and health anymore. That's something, or biomechanics. But other than that, I'm pretty much teach on most things. And yeah, my research is still interested in combat sports. And we're also looking at some stuff on muscle oxygenation. Look at we have a vibrating bike that we've got sent to us. The vibration goes to the pedals. So it's nothing perverse before anyone says anything. We're looking at how that uses, how the vibration changes how oxygen is being utilized by the body, and is there more of a demand or not? So that's what we're playing about with at the moment.
Is there anything you're able to share before we go? Because I'm going to go down that vitamin D research, but before that, is there anything you can share from that vibration bike, and then any other research that you're currently looking at and doing?
So with the vibration bike, what we're seeing is that the use of vibration puts a significantly greater oxidative demand on the body. So what we did was we're looking at the initial acute demands before we actually think about trying to use a training study. So we've got trained participants, males and females, and they had to cycle for 90 seconds at 60 RPM, 80 RPM, 100 RPM, 120 RPM, and we're letting everyone recover. So when they were connected to the gas mask, we're waiting for their VO2 to return back to baseline before they did the next bout. And then they would do the same thing, but with vibration. Okay, so they're looking at the same resistance, same cadence, but what does the vibration do? We've randomized the order that they did things in. Some people started with 120 RPM, level 5 with vibration. Some people started 60 RPM, level 1 with no vibration. So we changed things about a bit. And the use of vibration significantly increases not just the oxygen demand, so the VO2 that we're seeing, for example, level 5 with vibration at 120 RPM is actually similar to what people's VO2 max was. Um,
So you mean, but that would be like oxygen consumption,
yeah,
correct?
it's the amount of
Is what
oxygen
you're
that
talking
you're
about. Okay.
consuming, and also the time taken to recover is significantly longer, obviously because there's more of a demand. Also, the rate at which the muscle is desaturating with oxygen is greater with vibration than without vibration. What we're also seeing is that with cadence, that will change obviously the muscles which will be recruited. So the hamstring doesn't get recruited until the higher cadences. We're usually looking at least 100 to 120 RPM, and obviously with the vibration we get more of a recruitment in the hamstring. So that seems to be, there she is. There's my cat. So that will obviously have, as we know, when people have a hamstring injury, you should just be focusing on things like your Nordic curls or your general strength work. You need to make sure that the athlete is then moving the limb at the velocity it needs to move in the sport. And I think that's a big reason why we see a lot of hamstring strains in things like professional football, is that kind of go off a small tangent here, but that's okay. Often when people come back from a hamstring strain, they'll do their stuff in their gym and they'll see that their numbers are the same, and then they get re-injured again. I think that's because often either managers or coaches will wrap their athletes up in cotton wool and don't let them perform max effort sprints. Well, so when they ask them to do that in the game, the hamstring isn't really conditioned to do that activity, even though it's strong and not actually able to contract.
Yeah. Well, they're going off like a fucking Nord board, like peak force number, and then that. Oh, yep, that's all good. Asymmetry's better. And it's like, man, that's not even half the demand.
No, that,
Yeah.
like I said, think when you look at hamstring, that is one aspect of it. But when you look at hamstring strains, they occur from sprinting movement, mainly deceleration and change in direction to then reaccelerate. if the hamstring cannot sufficiently cope with these eccentric demands, which is sure enough what we kind of look to help with things like your Nordics and your RDLs, but if it can't then re-accelerate, then what's the point? If we're not conditioning the specific muscles to the demands of the sport, there's no point. And that's kind of what we saw with the vibration study, that cadence specifically, cadence is over 100 RPM, or what's needed to start to get the hamstring to start to become deoxygenated. In other words, get some kind of metabolic demand in the hamstring. So that's kind of what we've seen
What's
there.
interesting, what's interesting on the bike stuff, I will come back to that as well. There's a study a while ago. I reviewed it for Science of Sport. Must have been like 4 or 5 years ago. And I think it was they looked at. I was being on a bike. I think it was 4 times a week. I can't remember the exact length of the study and how much time I spent on it, but essentially doing a lot of bike riding. And this cohort led to essentially, I think it was short, like basically shorter muscle fascicle and shorter hamstrings. Basically saying if you're doing a lot of bike work, you may want to offset it with something else, or maybe you don't want to do as much, I guess, volume on the bike, especially as a team sport athlete when you got to run. Um, so yeah, that's just like kind of an interesting tip, I guess, to be for people listening, maybe to be aware of if you're doing a lot of like volume on a bike and you in a sport where you need to be, I guess, lengthened.
Yeah, 100%. Like you need things to be specific to the sport, but you don't want to go down a death by specificity route. Like, so a lot of coaches fall into this trap, and like, unless it's directly sport specific, we're not doing it. I was like, well, everything has a place. It depends how you use it. So, for example, go back to a bike, for example. If you're recovering from a hamstring injury, you might then want to start going off the conditioning, making sure they're hitting correct kind of cadences to get training in the hamstring, and then move that on to kind of more running based stuff later on, which will then mimic the actions a lot more than what to what they're going to be doing in the game. So everything has a place. I just need to be careful about how we use it.
So with the vibration bikes, say you have access to one randomly.
Yep.
Well, what's the real world application of using this vibration? You obviously mentioned it's more demanding on, I guess, for oxygen consumption, more demanding on the muscle. Does that mean then that that is something you would replace, say, normal bike sprints or normal biking with this vibration because of that? How are you seeing it being used?
So we've seen a couple of things with it. One is that even I think it was maybe John did this the other week. About 3 to 4 minutes of vibration bike increased core temperature by about a degree. So there has applications for acclimation studies where you need to increase core temperature for a long period of time to then get adaptations to exercise in the heat. But exercising with the bike, it does kind of buckle you for a couple of days afterwards. I find you're not really fully recovered. So I would do one or the other for most people. If you're a trained athlete, you can maybe supplement with both, but I can't really say for certain just yet. In terms of how you would do it, I wouldn't necessarily say it would be useful for sprints, like your typical sprint interval type stuff with like your load or your monarch bikes or anything like that. I think it leads itself more towards the high intensity interval training type stuff. E.g., you're exercising for at least a minute at a time with, again, depending on the athlete, either a 1-to-1 or a 1-to-3 work to rest ratio. And it definitely is hard. That's one thing that I will say. But the next kind of study we're going to be looking at that is we need to now actually properly distinguish if doing it with a vibration where we're matching it for work and on a non-vibrating bike makes a difference, because we put some power pedals on the vibrating bike, and what we saw was that the watts required to turn the pedals was a lot higher with the vibration on. So if we then got, say, one group on a load bike and they did, say, the same volume of work, e.g., minute long intervals at 300 watts, and then the other group had to then do 1 minute long intervals with the vibration matching 300 watts worth of work, what's the difference kind of there? But my initial view is that you can get more of a training demand with the vibration bike at a lower cadence. This will then have applications for aging, who maybe these people can't necessarily spin the pedals quite as fast, so we couldn't really call it a sprint. So because with the vibration, there's a lot more kind of mechanical inefficiency. There's a lot more kind of energy lost. So if you can recruit more of the muscle and get more of a training response at a lower cadence, does that then have transfer over to aging? Obviously, it has potential transfer over to sport. At the moment, we don't really know yet. This is just kind of what we've seen at the moment and kind of throwing some ideas out there.
Would you expect maybe a similar response to like the blood flow restriction research where you have like submaximal cycling with the BFR cuffs or submaximal walk, like even walking and jogging, they see some pretty good improvements and other things with BFR cuffs in those submaximal states?
I would imagine there'd be a similar kind of improvement, but I think the mechanisms would be different. Um, and I think it's
Mm,
because of mechanical inefficiency, you have to then have much more of a neural component to then drive the
mm,
muscles to actually push the pedals down. So I think if I'm throwing an idea out there, is be on much more of a neural drive rather than the
mm.
kind of more metabolic differences which we see with the blood flow stuff.
If you're anything like me, you're short on time. Kids, family, work, training, and having to cook meals on top of that is just not going to happen. So I'm happy to announce Trifecta Nutrition are sponsoring the podcast. You get epic meals like these ones: turkey taco bowl, Texas barbecue protein plate. These are a couple of my favorites. But it means you don't have to prepare all your own meals, and it makes getting and good nutrition relatively easy. I've tried other meal delivery companies. Most of them are too high fat, not enough carbohydrates, or if you're getting kits where you have to cook it yourself, the portions for two is actually for one, especially if you are like me and you're training often. So if you want to take something off your plate and have meals like this delivered to your door, go down the description. There's a link there where you can order Trifecta meals. This is the performance line, which are higher protein and higher carbohydrate. And you can use code LIFTBIG40. You'll get 40% off your first order.
If you got my my gears thinking now, my academic supervisor back home, he has this cool device he's developed like for eccentric cycling.
Yeah.
And no, what would happen if you put vibration while eccentric cycling?
Oh, that
Would
would
that
be
just be crazy?
awful.
That sounds crazy.
Oh, that would be disgusting. It would. Oh, it would be hard. And actually, I think that'd be too hard for most people, to be honest. I think if you're
Mm,
super trained, it could be useful. But even what we found with trained cyclists, not all of them could cycle at 120 RPM, level 5 resistance. Level 5 is an arbitrary resistance, which is on this bike. It goes up to level 5 with vibration. Not all of them could do that for 90 seconds. These were trained road cyclists. So I think if you added an
mm.
eccentric element, that would be just awful. Um, yeah, I don't,
Worth trying then.
well, see if we could try and figure it out somehow. That could be fun.
Yeah, yeah, it's an interesting point. And I remember when I had Dr. John Babry on here, one of your colleagues, and was he one of your supervisors as well?
Yeah, so that's my PhD. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So he was talking about vibration, like he's going down the rabbit hole vibration stuff with you, and he was talking about vibration plates. I guess using it for oxygen, muscle oxygen desaturation as well. So,
Yeah.
are there any other applications around this vibration that maybe you think have potential applications within sport and maybe potential uses?
The vibration bike or vibration in general?
Even just vibration in general.
I think with the vibration in general stuff, it's usually not done correctly. I understand that whole idea around it being that if you're on a vibration plate, you do exercise, you get more muscle improvement, therefore it's going to lead to strength improvements. That's not necessarily what has been seen. I think we need to be subjecting participants to prolonged vibration to actually see some kind of an improvement. And I think potentially for sport, I wouldn't use vibration in a traditional S&C sense, e.g., to get somebody stronger. I think just standard weight training, when I say standard weight training, whatever you call that, in other words, on a stable surface is the kind of way to go. But I think it has some potential conditioning uses. So
Mm.
potentially, after you do a sprint, you go to the vibration, but on a vibration plate, for example, um, that can then slow down recovery essentially, and then you get to repeated sprints. You're now chronically making people be in an oxygen depleted state, which may
You chronically feel like shit.
pretty much, yeah. And that could then have benefits. But I think from a strength point of view, no. From a conditioning point of view, maybe. Probably not.
I mean, even if I'm thinking now, like if you're looking to do some kind of we'll call like quote unquote muscle conditioning, even holding like push-up positions on it, maybe
Yeah.
with your hands on it, that's going to get you the desaturation profile
Yeah,
somewhat.
100%. So I was actually a student last year. So she did sprints, and she got people to hold a quarter squat on a vibrating plate in the afterwards to see if that would do anything, or if you heard of quarter squat with no vibration. We've seen some other things that vibrations can be useful for. In that sense, so yeah, I think the key thing there is for me, vibration is more of a condition tool rather than a strength tool, which vibrations traditionally be used as a strength tool in the past. So obviously, it was developed back in the
Mm.
60s for NASA to help athletes with the zero gravity stuff. Um, there might be something there, but I think it's definitely more so in the conditioning sense.
I see in like the CrossFit world, they used it as like a recovery tool, like they call like lymphatic drainage or whatever else. I don't know. I'm so okay.
Again, I'm not convinced. Don't get me wrong, vibration will kind of get the lymphatic system moving, but I don't think that it will actually help with recovery. I think it'll be the opposite. Because sort of what, like I said, but which is the reason why I think that we saw this increase in core temperature from doing like an interval protocol of vibration bike, probably is due to the lymphatic system kind of kicking in. Oh, hello. But like, yeah, this is more of like a training adaptation rather than like a recovery modality.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially with the intensity of the vibrations and stuff like that.
Even,
But it's
you
interesting
don't
that
go
you
too
would,
high with the vibration, because what we've seen,
you can't go too high.
well, if you do, then you don't get the same response. So if you vibrate
Mm.
at say 60 hertz, whatever it is, um, you don't get as much for a muscle desaturation. In other words, the muscle doesn't use up oxygen as much as if you were to be on 35 hertz. So there is a sweet spot. It's kind of like, your standard bell-shaped curve. Like, it's just like anything else. I think that 35 hertz for just standing, without even talking about vibration on a bike or anything, that kind of range is better for getting the muscle to use up oxygen.
Interesting. And on that idea, I guess sweet spots. So your vitamin D research.
Yep.
It's probably one of the more interesting areas of vitamin D, especially because it's related to performance. I know we've way back we covered some of your previous research on it. And now you obviously got a new paper, but let's run through the timeline from the beginning of that research to your new paper now. Kind of what happened in those studies, what you looked at, and then kind of the findings as it progressed through.
So the first study was a dose response study looking at vitamin D. And we started off with 3 groups, 50,000 IUs per week, 80,000 IUs per week, or 110,000 IUs per week. And we then, everyone was acting as no control. So then we then saw that there was no benefit to supplementing with more than 50,000 IUs per week in terms of improvements in VO2 max, in terms of improvements in hematocrit and hemoglobin levels, in terms of improvements in like your weight gain performance. So taking more doesn't do anything extra, which is kind of what we've seen a lot of different kind of supplementation studies. Like there is like an upper limit for this. So then the question was, right, so if we combine vitamin D with training, what happens? So we got 2 groups. One took 50,000 IUs per week. Now, I did it weekly because, long story short, I wasn't able to get enough funding to actually assess vitamin D levels. I had to make sure that people were taking the vitamins so I could watch them take their supplements once per week. That's why we did it that way, to make it easier for everyone. So one group took 50,000 IUs per week. Other group took 5 capsules of olive oil, which doesn't really do much for high intensity exercise and it looks the same as the vitamin D tablets. They then did sprint interval training, combined lower and upper body using cycle ergometers in a lab. And we saw that in the vitamin D group, there was improvement in hematocrit and hemoglobin, so potentially a better ability to transport oxygen around the body. We also saw that the effect size and whatnot were more in line with improving VO2 max and time to exhaustion, weight gain power, etc., with vitamin D as opposed to not taking vitamin D. And this is probably because vitamin D in itself isn't a vitamin; it's a pro-hormone. it needs to be activated by the body for it then to induce effects. And these effects are multifaceted. They are genomic and non-genomic. The genomic effects, we're talking about increases in mitochondrial biogenesis, mitochondrial efficiency. In other words, vitamin D will switch on or switch off various genes in the body. So if you don't have enough vitamin D, you're not then switching on as many of these genes in all the various cells, which means you're not getting the full benefit. And the non-genomic effects are when a vitamin D binds to the membrane vitamin D receptors on cells, which can then influence more rapid changes in things like calcium dynamics, which is probably why some papers have seen that if you take vitamin D, there are improvements in muscle strength. There was one paper, it was by Wyon et al. I can't remember the name of the year, sorry. But they gave judoka 150,000 IUs of vitamin D, tested them before and then 10 days after the vitamin D supplementation, and the vitamin D significantly improved muscle strength and RFD. And these improvements are too fast to be due to any changes in genomic transcription because, to improve strength from increases in hypertrophy to take a long time to do that. And it was thought that it's differences in calcium dynamics which do it. Because when vitamin D binds onto vitamin D receptors on the cell membrane, it can then more basically trigger the muscle to more rapidly release calcium into the muscle and reuptake it again. More calcium in the muscle, more cross bridges formed, more strength, and also improved rate of force development. So there's kind of a multi-faceted approach to how vitamin D could be working. It's also kind of acts to mop up reactive oxygen species and things like that, which is probably why it's improving things like hematocrit, because if red blood cells interact with reactive oxygen species, become a lot stiffer. And when you're exercising, it's going through all the tissues and whatnot. If it's a stiff red blood cell, it'll break, and if it breaks, it needs to get mopped up and recycled. Whereas if you can improve the environment within the body by removing these reactive oxygen species and stuff, the red blood cells can be a bit more supple, means they can go through all the arteries and veins and whatnot to a better extent, thereby prolonging the life of the red blood cells, which we kind of tried to have a look at in the third paper, and also the actual number of red blood cells which are there. So that was the final study happened during COVID. I was put on hold for a year, and when I was allowed to go back to do my research, I wasn't allowed into the labs really. I wasn't allowed to do any gas stuff. I wasn't allowed to do a whole bunch of stuff. And then obviously, because I come up with my PhD, I thought, right, how am I going to actually get a third study without doing all the thing I wanted to do? So I decided on a really short duration intervention of 2 weeks of sprint interval training, because we've seen in the literature that 6 sessions is enough to induce positive adaptation. And I was able to phrase that as often combat athletes will take 2 weeks to get ready for a fight. It happens all the time. Where are you fighting? When? Oh, 2 weeks. Oh, okay, cool. Right. So it does happen. And I decided to use a hill sprint intervention combined with battle ropes. So still looking at lower and upper body conditioning, because that is important for combat athletes. Combat athletes are unique in that they need to have a good element of upper body conditioning to compete relatively well in their sport. So then took that alongside either vitamin D or an olive oil placebo. And we then looked at repeated sprint ability. So I had to stay far away from the other end of the lab while they sprinted on the bike. And I was then able to have to dust down the lab afterwards. One of those Ghostbuster guns with sprays out.
Yeah.
I had to use one of them around the bike and the entire lab and everything.
Oh my gosh.
It was unreal, with gloves on, PPE equipment, the whole shebang, to then get the data off the computer, to then have a look at that kind of thing. And then taking a fingerprint blood sample was a nightmare. I was goggles, mask on, the whole shebang. But what we saw with that was that battle ropes were an ineffective conditioning modality for improving repeated sprintability in the upper body. In fact, it made it a little bit worse. Using the protocol we did. Now, there isn't really an established battle rope protocol, so we use a Tabata method because that's been done before. It seemed like a reasonable place to start. And then hill sprints were useful at improving repeated sprintability, and that the vitamin D had an additive effect. So that's essentially the nutshell from that. Also, we assessed isometric contractile holdability, in other words, holding a wall set or holding isometric push-up hold for how long they could do that for. No difference in the olive oil group, significantly improved in the vitamin D group. So that was, that's essentially like the nutshell of those 3 papers.
Nice. Funny enough, you mentioned about the PPE. We were flying home during COVID. We had to wear, I think it was on one of the international flights. We had to wear a fucking mask, plastic thing down over that covers your face during the flight. Crazy shit.
Awful.
So, coming to those vitamin D studies, it's interesting. It's so interesting to hear about a supplement that can have such a significant effect, because when you think supplements and performance, you think, okay, creatine, even though the effects are relatively small in the grand scheme of things, and then outside of that, you pretty much have nothing to really give you like a strong effect in performance. But vitamin D is like, I mean, that's relatively consistent across those 3 studies.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that it does that.
But only if you're deficient. If you're not,
Only if you're deficient.
If you're not deficient, then taking vitamin D, it will do nothing for you.
Gotcha.
Obviously, I had combat athletes based in Scotland, and one, we don't see the sun, and when we do, we don't actually get any UV radiation between October and about May time. And then we kind of compound that with the fact that combat athletes will tend to be indoors all the time, or when they are outside, they'll have lots of layers of clothing on if they're going for runs, etc. They don't get a lot of vitamin D creation from exposure to the sun, and also they tend to not be eating properly, so they don't get a lot of vitamin D from the diet anyway. So for that group of athletes, it was probably useful. For beach volleyball players in Texas, probably wouldn't be all that useful for them. So it's all about context.
Yeah. Well, what is deficient in terms of numbers on a blood test? I haven't actually looked at that.
It depends who you ask. It's something like that.
Okay, so what is your opinion?
My opinion is you need to be having vitamin D levels of higher than 75 nanomoles per liter to be considered sufficient. Now, the IOMs say that anything over 50 is sufficient. Now, most people use the IOM numbers because they are relatively well established, but there's a lot of papers out there now which show that there are beneficial effects of getting vitamin D status up to this 75 nanomoles to about 125 nanomoles per liter to get kind of the maximum benefits. Now, for most people, 50 would probably be fine for like a normal population. But when you're talking about trying to maximize performance, then getting it up to this kind of 75 number is probably the way to go, I would say, just from what I've seen. However, there isn't really a consensus on that. I think most governments use the guidelines from the IOM, so which is like your 50 nanomoles per liter, and they use their cutoffs to define deficiency, insufficiency, and optimal as that. But I don't think that's quite correct. It's also why I don't think the protein recommendations are correct either, where they say that most people will need 0.8 grams per kilogram body mass. I think that is too low as well, especially for an Asian population. I think governments especially will err on the side of caution, which is fine. I completely understand that. But if there's more evidence to say that things should be different, then maybe people should be willing to reconsider their position.
Can you reach that 75 to 125 level for vitamin D just from sun exposure?
You can do. Yep. If you
would you need a lot?
You're probably looking at about an hour of exposure a day to reach those power levels.
So that is quite.
But you need to be careful, obviously, that you don't burn yourself, because if you get yourself skin cancer, that defeats the whole purpose in the first place. Which is why I think, to quote Graham Close, he's a big advocate for a food first, but not food only approach. Get your vitamins, get your macros, etc., from food sources where possible. But when that isn't practical, then supplementation could be useful.
Yeah.
So
vitamin D is cheap enough too.
Yeah, that's you could get a year's supply of vitamin D. Vitamin D3. It's before you get vitamin D3, not vitamin D2. You supply vitamin D3 for like what, £5? So that's what, like $4?
It's like $10.
Yeah, if that, like it's nothing.
Yeah.
It's really, you could go to Amazon and get it. It's dead easy. Like I said, I gave 50,000 IUs per week in one go because I had to make sure they were taking it. And like I said, I take it 50,000 IUs a week in one go because it's easier for me that way. If you're somebody who likes to have a daily routine, then taking 4,000 IUs per day is perfectly acceptable as well.
Nice. I did a video on your latest paper recently, and it's doing all right. It's got 1.2K views looking at your research now.
Nice.
And one of the questions was, why not 25,000 IUs?
So there was a paper, oh God, I can't remember the paper for the life of me. Oh, it's just escaped me. But that looked at 20,000 IUs compared to 50,000 IUs, and it seemed that the 50,000 group was better. Now, I'm not saying that what I did was completely infallible. If I had more people in my first paper, I would have loved to have done a lower dose study as well to then see where the kind of key one is there. But what we see is that if you take a big dose of vitamin D in one go, some of it will be turned into an inactive form of vitamin D to be then be excreted. So you need the higher dose to then get yourself up to that kind of level. Now, if you're taking it daily, that 4,000 IUs is obviously a much lower consumption of vitamin D3 in a week. So 4,000 IUs per day over 7 days, obviously a lot lower than 50,000 IUs. But you're then better able to process it. So that you're not as much of it is becoming this inactive form to then be excreted. Well, obviously, vitamin D toxicity is a thing, but it's very, very difficult to do. You need to be taking.
Yeah, I was going to ask, like, if you go over that 125, is that when you start getting into that territory?
No, I've only really heard of it where people have been taking 10,000 IUs per day for a period of 6 months. So that's like, yeah, that's far, far, far too much at that point. You don't need to do that because you're taking loads of vitamin D, it's a dropping, taking loads, dropping, and you get that kind of effect there. When you take the 50,000 one go, you then utilize what you can, get rid of what you can't, and then you just kind of tick along in that kind of range there.
Well, what are the symptoms of someone who would have vitamin D toxicity?
It tends to be kidney damage. So kind of any kind of symptom you associate with kidney damage could be a symptom of vitamin D toxicity. It is very hard to do. Like there was one paper I read, somebody accidentally gave elderly people, it was like 100,000 IUs of vitamin D3 in one go, rather than 10,000 IUs. And there was no negative side effects apart from elevated blood calcium level, and which returned to normal relatively quickly. So taking a single high dose is not going to do too much to you in a negative sense. But if you are chronically taking high dose vitamin D and you're chronically having high levels of calcium in your blood, that calcium is going to go somewhere. In other words, it's going to start to block up the kidneys. And you'll then start to form more plaques in the kidneys. Your kidneys aren't going to be filtering water as effectively, and then all the other symptoms which can come from that.
And the other, I think I've done some vitamin D content around your stuff before. Or maybe it was even on a question on maybe the older podcast you're on. But people will always ask, okay, if I'm taking so much vitamin D, don't I need to take vitamin K2 with it? Is that something that, why would someone even want to do that in the first place? And is that something that you would recommend or think is needed?
Yeah, you can. You absolutely can. I think it's a good thing to do. By and large, especially if you don't eat enough in in your diet, which again most people don't do. It's generally a good thing to do. I would say because it makes sure that the vitamin D is going to where you want it to go. In other words, it's not just kind of clog up your kidneys. Essentially, for people who are wondering, if you take vitamin K alongside vitamin D, it makes the calcium deposit into teeth and bones a lot more. essentially, as you don't take the vitamin K, then there's going to have more calcium floating around in the blood. Like I said, vitamin D directly influences calcium and how it is utilized in the body, which has led to, like I said, the strength increases. But you can take it, but I wouldn't say it's absolutely essential, because vitamin K toxicity is probably more dangerous than vitamin D toxicity. So just kind of be careful of that.
Okay, but yeah, because you see a lot of vitamin D supplements now, kind of like D3 plus K2, and they kind of combine them together.
Yeah. Yeah, it's common
Okay.
because that's the recommendation. If you want to improve bone health, then taking vitamin K with vitamin D is the way to go. But this all
Gotcha.
stems from the old stuff, where people used to think that vitamin D was only useful to prevent people getting rickets. But we now know vitamin D
Okay.
does a lot more than that. There's vitamin D receptors in basically every nucleated cell in your body. It's thought to directly affect the transcription of approximately 1,500 genes. When I was writing my PhD, it was 1,200. It's now up to 1,500 genes. So it does a lot. It's not just to do with bone health. I think that's an important thing to understand there. But within that, like I said, food first, not food only. You should try and get everything from the diet, because vitamin D needs magnesium and zinc to work properly as well. If you're deficient in magnesium, it'll not work. If you're deficient in zinc, it'll not work. It's literally, you need to make sure everything in your diet is kind of nailed down first, and then some, especially here in Scotland, someone with vitamin D to get to these active levels, so it'll actually do its job. If you don't have enough zinc or magnesium in your diet, you can take all the vitamin D you want, it's not going to do anything.
Interesting. So what would be some dietary foods that people can look to eat to get some vitamin D in, but maybe also address some of that zinc and magnesium?
So for vitamin D, you get vitamin D2 from mushrooms, so any kind of plant-based source. With vitamin DU3, that's mainly from things like your oily fish and your eggs and things like that. But as for things like for magnesium, your main ones are your nuts, your kind of dark leafy greens, beans, things like that. As long as you're eating like a balanced diet, trying to eat like your minimum 5 a day, you'll probably be fine for having enough magnesium in there. You also get some magnesium from milk, which is why in all the papers I gave all the vitamin D with
I saw that.
like Jersey whole fat milk. One, Jersey milk's like a really kind of fatty milk. So if there's more fat with the vitamin D, it's then going to actually go into your system a lot easier. Two, milk has zinc and magnesium, which then may help make it work. Because the magnesium is required to turn the vitamin D into its active form. So the CYP enzymes, which convert vitamin D into 25-OHD and 125-OHD, they need magnesium to work. When vitamin D goes into the tissues to induce its genomic effects, that needs to bind to retinoid X receptors, which have zinc attached to them, for it to actually do anything. So it's a multi-stage process there.
Nice. And if I was going to summarize the mechanisms that you went through, just for people listening, because I want to come back to that, for vitamin D working. So you're looking at improved oxygen delivery.
Yep.
You're looking at improved mitochondrial, I guess, function and more mitochondria. You're looking at improved calcium sensitivity.
Yep.
As like, I guess, three main mechanisms when getting vitamin D into that nice 75 to 125 range.
Yep. And so
nice.
They are I would say the three biggest ones. Because vitamin D is also involved in nitric oxide synthesis. So if you have more nitric oxide, or you have nitric oxide is working properly, it's then causing a vasodilatory effect, therefore flooding the muscle with more blood. More blood equals more oxygen, more substrate, better clearance. So, yeah, I would say that you break down each of those three parts. There are multiple facets to each, but yeah, they're probably the three main things.
Perfect. And obviously you did battle ropes in that final study. You obviously mentioned that there wasn't as much that came out of that, but we're interested to hear your thoughts on using battle ropes for sprint interval training, because typically, I guess most people, they have air bikes, which is kind of full body, and then pretty much no one has an arm ergometer because who has a massive arm ergometer machine just like sitting in their garage at their gym?
Oh,
So battle ropes, can battle ropes be a solid substitute for upper body sprint intervals?
for me, the jury is out. So I saw that with my protocol, I say my protocol, Tabata created it back in the dawn of time. With protocol,
1999.
so with the protocol that I use, it didn't do anything. However, I've actually got a paper out from peer review just now, which looked at 6 weeks of battle rope training in wheelchair athletes, and that improved their distance covered in a 12-minute push test. Didn't improve anything else, but improved that. Another paper I saw, it was Bornath and Keno. Again, the year escapes me. They did a 6-week intervention, but they did a lot more work in each training session with the battle ropes. And also, they alternated the battle rope exercise after each bout. So I just did, 20 seconds battle roping like that, like what most people associate with it. Martha Keno did that, and they also did the big slams as well. So maybe you need to vary the exercise enough so that you get training response. Because my theory is, if you just did normal battle ropes, like your double arm whipping motion, there's a technique element to it. And if you can start to, this will sound like a weak,
Okay, you get too efficient.
yeah, you'll get efficient with it. Will sound like a surfer, like you ride the wave essentially. You're not
Yeah.
actually then putting yourself under a lot of metabolic stress, which means you're not going to adapt. Because the first time you do a set of battle ropes, you go, oh, that was hard. But often people don't do it on the regular, or they'll do battle ropes as part of a circuit, or at the end of the
Yeah.
session when you're already fatigued. If you were to do battle ropes as a standalone, let's say you did it 3 times per week, and you just did 20 seconds of alternating whipping movement, I guarantee you by the end of week 2, you'll find it relatively easy.
Yeah.
So I think what you need to do is you need to alternate the exercise, and you also need to make sure that you're progressing the exercise in a kind of a logical way, which I think is probably more important for battle ropes. Like if you do your standard sprint interval training on a bike, you do your whatever it is, like 4 sprints of 15 seconds. You tend to be doing that against the set resistance. You're on an ergometer or you're on an air bike. You just go as hard as you can. It's relatively unskilled. You just need to go and you get that kind of cardiovascular response. You start to feel the fatigue in the muscle. All that starts to happen. To get the same kind of cardiovascular response in battle ropes, it's important that you probably stress the system for a bit more, because obviously the upper body has a lower muscle mass, the lower body, so will not have as much of a cardiac requirement. And you need to be changing these exercises so that you're actually kind of hitting everything. Because that was another kind of thing. I put the limitations in my last study. We assessed repeated sprint ability on an arm ergometer. How much transfer is there from battle ropes to an arm ergometer? Well, from what we saw there, nothing. In fact, like I said, it made it worse. So for me, the jury is out on it. I'm not saying that it doesn't work. I just said it didn't work for over 2 weeks in the protocol that we used. But I'm also not saying that it is amazing and it should be included in every single combat sport person's S&C arsenal either.
Have you looked at any of the muscle oxygenation data while using battle ropes?
Not yet, because that's quite hard. Especially you think of combat athletes, you think of the lightweights and stuff. They don't tend to have big muscles. And it's kind of and this is the thing. So most of the muscle oxygenation stuff, we look at the legs because, the vas lateralis, biceps femoris, rectus femoris, they're relatively big muscles, relatively, 1, easy to find, 2, relatively easy to place. If I'm trying to place a sensor on somebody's anterior delt, for something like Halford Bjornsson, sure, that'd be easy enough. But you got somebody who weighs 57 kilograms. The placement will be kind of off. So no, we haven't really done that yet, but I would like to do something like that in the future. But we need to make sure that we're getting suitably trained participants with large enough muscle mass I can actually place the monitors on with confidence that it's actually reading muscle oxygenation levels in the muscle.
You should recruit some powerlifters or bodybuilders or something. There should be a few around.
Oh, no, cardio kills gains. Yeah, they'll never do that.
if someone was looking to experiment with some battle rope stuff, maybe they had that, they wanted to do some upper body, how would you recommend they would do the sprint intervals? Would they run, say, the exact same protocol as like a bike sprint, say like 10 on, 20 off, or would you need longer intervals with the battle rope?
I think you need longer intervals. I would actually go 30 second on for most people. So I would say 30 seconds on, depending on the fitness level, either a 1-to-1 up to a 1-to-3 work to rest ratio for a minimum of 4 bouts. That's probably what I would say. It would be the bare minimum. And even if you wanted to expand on that, you could do 30 seconds double whip, 30 seconds slams, 30 seconds big circles, back to that. And then you could kind of run through that a couple times. But I do think you need to have a much longer period to actually get the muscle stress that we need. Like I said, which will be helped by changing the exercise. So you don't kind of get into a rhythm of just kind of going through it for technique.
Is there a cadence consideration too? Like obviously the one everyone does is kind of fast, but the slams are relatively slow.
As fast as you can.
Does that as fast as you can?
Yeah.
Even though you cannot do the slams as fast as, say, I don't know what you call this fucking
alternating
hand job one
is what it's using there in literature.
And you can't do the slams as fast as that. So is that going to have a different effect then on potentially what's happening at the muscle? And
potentially, but as long as intensity is there, because intensity is what drives adaptation. You need to be stressing the system in some way, shape, or form. As long as the intensity is there, you go as fast as you can with good form, then with the slams, you're using more of the muscle anyway. Well, using more muscles, should I say.
Yeah.
So you'll still be getting that response there, as long as you're going as fast as you can. Because that's the thing, battle ropes will never be used to develop power, because to develop power, you need to be relatively unfatigued. E.g., you do your cleans, you can do your cluster sets, whatever it is. Battle ropes are a conditioning thing. So, yeah, I think when people try to program them for power, that's inherently wrong. you probably see that.
That's crazy. Yeah. As have you used them at all for like a high intensity interval training approach? Like you mentioned earlier, like you're kind of over a minute intervals for that kind of response?
No, I've not. I think it lends itself a lot more to the kind of sprint style stuff.
Okay.
Because again, as you said, how do you control for cadence? You would probably need to have a heart rate monitor on or something with a screen on which you can see the heart rate. You then need to up or down the work rate to try and fall within a set range for the time period, because there's no way to really monitor
to quantify,
yeah, exactly. It's relatively easy to do for cycle stuff. It's been done to death in the literature. People have done it to heart rate, they've done it to maximal aerobic power, maximal aerobic speed, or whatever it is. But I think with battle ropes, it's a lot more difficult to do. So I think it does lead itself a lot more to the sprint interval stuff, where you just say, right, go as hard and as fast as you can, because then what they're doing is largely irrelevant as long as they're meeting that maximal volitional effort. Because that's what we did with the wheelchair basketball guys, was maximal volitional effort. Because there's no point in trying to match up to heart rate, because if you have a spinal cord injury, that could then influence exactly how kind of heart rate you can use in terms of function you got your arms and stuff. So it's not really practical in that sense. So it's much easier to do it that way.
You mentioned the wheelchair basketball guys. What was the test they improved? Was it time? Was there time trial? Time to exhaustion?
So it was wheelchair basketball. One group did battle ropes. One group didn't for 6 weeks, and they trained twice a week, and they did 50-second intervals for 6 bouts. We looked at 20-meter sprint. So 0, 5, 10, 20 meters split straight at that. There's a modified T-test. We looked at hand grip strength, and I did a 20-minute push test. So we've set out a course. How far can you go? A 12-minute push test. How far can you go in 12 minutes around the track? And the group who did no training everything was the same, nothing got better, nothing got worse, because they were still doing the normal wheelchair basketball training throughout all this. The group which did the battle ropes, the only thing which improved was their ability to travel around the track, which then implies an improved VO2 max. But obviously, it was inferential because there's an equation that we used to determine what VO2 max would be from distance covered. And that was about it. It didn't actually help with any of the power metrics, which is also why I'm saying that battle ropes is a conditioning tool. It's not a tool to develop power. Because even in wheelchair sports, who rely entirely on the upper body for locomotion, battle ropes did nothing to improve sprint speed or agility. It did, however, improve their ability to go. So that's over peer review just now. Hopefully that is available soon.
Nice. And to round this one out, which would be nice for, I think, for listeners, your top recommended supplements for fighters. You can use many or as little as you want.
With vitamin D, obviously. 4,000 IUs per day for most people, or if you want to do a weekly dose, 50,000. He said potentially less would be fine, but I'm going by what we see in the literature. People take large weekly doses. 50,000 seems to be the most common one. The one which
wait, isn't 4,000 IUs a day only 30? Shit, my math. 32,000.
That's what I was saying earlier on, because when you take a large weekly dose, a lot of it will become
gotcha.
OD, which is used, which we can't then use it to actually do anything. Whereas you take the 4,000, you know, utilize more of that per bolus. That makes sense. So we level it out. So vitamin D, and I've taken omega-3s. No more than 5 grams per day, but about 2 grams per day for most people, especially if you don't eat oily fish. Make sure that your EPA to DHA ratio is 3:1 with that, because that is better for cardiac function. And it also seems the theory being that kind of ratio will allow the muscle to function a bit better. If you had a DHA to EPA ratio, that seems to be better for brain function. So maybe when you're tired, switch that around. Who knows? I have no real evidence to suggest one way or another for that one, but definitely omega-3. If you can stomach it, beta-alanine, I cannot stomach it at all. I hate the tingles.
Those tingles are fucking killer.
I can't. Like, if you can stomach it, then fine. But again, the important thing to understand with beta-alanine is that taking it as a pre-workout will do nothing for you. And that's obviously what people do. And that's how the supplement companies get you. They sell you your pre-workout.
It's working.
And it's high caffeine, so you feel your heart going like that. You feel the tingly, and you think, I must be ready to work out. It's like, well, no. You need to be taking beta-alanine consistently for at least 3 weeks before it will do anything, even on days that you're not training. So I would take beta-alanine. Creatine is what I would love to recommend, but only on fighters who are not actively preparing or thinking about preparing for competition. Because we need to think about the weight, which is a big thing there. Obviously, with creatine, you can take on an extra about 2 kilos of water weight, give or take, roughly. And that could be a problem. But the thing with creatine is there's some stuff coming out now. It might be useful to help recover for brain injury. But again, the jury is out on that. Also, we know
that's mostly animal research, isn't it?
Exactly. They are doing a trial just now in somewhere in the States, which is looking at creatine as a potential supplement to reduce risk of brain injury. But again, there is nothing really concrete on that. But we do know is that creatine levels in the brain do fall after a concussion, but correlation does not equal causation, obviously. I would love to recommend creatine, but it would really depend on where the fighter is in their training block or what they're planning on doing. If a fighter's come back from injury, so let's say they've had a shoulder injury, you may as well take creatine and you'll be focusing on power and strength development of the lower body while rehabbing the injury to the upper body. And then once you've then got the benefits of the creatine, which will potentially allow you to train a little bit more, in other words, complete more work in each training set, then stop the creatine. In theory, you'll still have the benefits from having trained well on the creatine, and then after about 4 weeks, your excess water weight from taking the creatine will drop down again. So creatine is a maybe, used with caution. And to be honest, that is really about it.
I did have a question in the chat on your opinion on L-citrulline.
I don't. With L-citrulline, I think the evidence is not quite there yet, to be honest. I don't think it'll do you any harm, but I don't think it's going to help either. Yeah, that's just my opinion on it. But like I said, with a lot of these supplements, a lot of the markets, a lot of things you'll see on social media are just that. They're just kind of bump. Now, because also,
So it's sold as like a vasodilator, basically. It's like the nitric oxide. It's like the new nitric oxide that they like to push.
yeah. Except it'll not hurt, but I'm not sure it'll help either. So I'm not willing to say one way or the other until I see enough kind of concrete evidence that kind of makes me go, yeah, this is something that we could take. Because we don't, what is optimal L-citrulline levels? How do you define that? What we don't know.
No, fair enough. Just to quickly finish this on beta-alanine. So obviously, the mechanism of beta-alanine, more carnosine. The idea is that you buffer the acidity. But if you go, if you talk to like Dr. John Babry, acidity is seen as probably a good thing for maintaining force production.
Yep.
So what is happening? What is happening with beta-alanine? Why is that potentially giving us better short-term endurance?
In a summary, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either. That's why I'm asking you. I'm like, this doesn't make sense to me.
No, because I am with John on this one. So it's really funny. So obviously, John was my PhD supervisor, and we both teach at Abertay. He teaches physiology. I teach the strength and conditioning. And I'll say something, and then John on the very next class will go, what he said is load of rubbish, load of shite, not true. The students come back to me and go, John said this. And I'll go, well, fine, but this is my counter argument to that. So we end up arguing through the students through the course of an academic year. So the students quite like it because basically whenever I say John hates weight training, obviously he thinks it's stupid. He's very vocal about that. Whereas I think weight training is good as long as you don't just do bro lifting. Everything has its place though. But I do agree that this idea of metabolic acidosis causing fatigue, it doesn't quite add up, because when you look at a lot of the papers which investigate fatigue, they look at skin muscle fibers which have been treated in temperatures about 5 degrees Celsius, or they've been stored in sub-zero temperatures. Humans don't function like that. Our muscles aren't skinned, and we have a core body temperature of 37 degrees Celsius. And when you actually have a look at things like effective acidity on muscle fibers, which are done at higher temperatures, which I think the highest I've seen is 25 degrees Celsius, the effect on acidity and contraction, the loss, wasn't actually there. So I think that's also important to kind of understand. And even if you look at the position stand for the International Society of Sports Nutrition, the ISSN, anyway, they have a really good position stand on beta-alanine, and it does review the kind of papers on beta-alanine, but it kind of locks in this idea of carnosine being a muscle buffer, and I'm not convinced that that's actually the answer. I think carnosine is doing something else. Now, for what that is, I'm not sure. I'm not really willing to say one way or the other, but I don't think it is muscle buffering because of these other papers which have looked at, kind of these skin muscle fibers and stuff. Something's not quite adding up. I'm not going to say.
That's why I asked you the question.
Yeah,
because it's not adding up for me either.
I'm not going to say something is good or something is bad unless I have some kind of evidence. If I don't know something, I'll just say I don't know. But I do think
Mm.
what we have seen is that it does tend to work, provided you can stomach the tinglies. And this has been seen throughout a bunch of different papers. I think the evidence is kind of more strongly leaning towards beta-alanine working than it not. However, the mechanisms behind it, I don't know. I really don't know, because at least with vitamin D research, it's also linked to health. So with health,
Yeah.
there's more money. The more money, there's a lot more money which goes into the mechanistics of it. Beta-alanine is very much a sports supplement. And by default,
No one wants to fund that.
doesn't have as much. It doesn't have as much kind of clout with it as well. Even then, like, even if there was a health benefit, I couldn't see my granny taking beta-alanine. You know what I mean?
And tingling her face off on the couch.
She'd be speaking out, just saying. That would be awful. It'd be kind of funny, actually, but no, you know, it just doesn't make. Like I said, the whole idea of muscle buffering just doesn't make sense. To me, it doesn't make sense, should I say. Maybe some people would disagree with me, and that's perfectly fine. I'm not going to get butthurt over a difference in opinion, you know. But no, I think it'll have something to do with carbohydrate metabolism, potentially, but I don't know what that is yet. Because carnitine is
Well, that'll be a second PhD.
Oh God, no more. Oh, I would love to do some actually looking at carbohydrate metabolism with beta-alanine, but again, that would be a whole bunch of money, which I do not have at the moment.
No, fair enough. That's a good way to end the pod, Andy. Where can people find and follow you? Keep up with what you're doing. Keep up with the research, etc.
So I got ResearchGate a couple months ago, so that's exciting. So I'm on ResearchGate now. I
I'll have
know.
to follow you.
I know, it's very fancy. So what else? We got ResearchGate. If you ever want to get me on Instagram or LinkedIn, I'm on those things. Or you can just email me at a.marley@aberdeen.ac.uk. More than happy to fire an email back and kind of chat nonsense about what I'm kind of been doing.
Nice. I'll link that up in the description for anyone who's interested. But I appreciate you coming on and sharing all the knowledge and research on vitamin D.
Oh, always a pleasure to be on. Love it.